All right, so we got a great book to deep dive into today.
Yeah.
It's a Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
It's classic.
And it is. And, you send in some notes saying that you're really looking for some tips for project management.
For
So
sure.
we're going to try to tailor it to that specifically today.
Sounds good.
The Lean Startup, the core idea is about this idea of validated learning. So like testing assumptions, experimenting rapidly, which I think is really relevant in the unpredictable world of projects.
Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things that Ries does is he doesn't limit this type of thinking to, tech startups.
Yeah.
He really emphasizes that entrepreneurs are everywhere.
Does that.
You could be in, a big corporation,
Right?
heading up a project team and still benefit from this mindset.
So even if you're not, in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
building the next big, unicorn, this still has something for you.
Exactly. Because, at its heart, project management is about navigating uncertainty.
Yeah.
Sure. Will the project hit its deadlines? Will it deliver the expected value?
Right.
The Lean Startup really equips you with a framework to tackle those unknowns head on.
Okay, so first tip off the bat for our project managers out there.
Yeah,
Think like an entrepreneur, even if you're in, working at a big company.
for sure.
And Reese talks a lot about validated learning.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
Yeah. It's about prioritizing learning over, sticking rigidly to a plan.
Right.
It's about constantly testing your assumptions against real-world feedback. And he illustrates this with a great story about IMVU.
Okay.
You familiar with IMVU?
Vaguely. I think they're like a 3D avatar chat.
Yeah, 3D avatar chat platform. And they started with this really complex software packed with features,
Okay.
but users just weren't interested.
Yeah, I remember reading about that, and their initial assumptions about what users wanted were like way off.
Completely off. And it was only through customer feedback that they
Yeah.
realized they needed to pivot. And so they shifted to a more standalone platform focused on, helping people make new friends.
Okay.
And that proved to be much more successful.
Okay, so that leads perfectly to the next tip, which is build, measure, learn,
Right.
which is like a cornerstone of the book.
Yeah, it's this continuous cycle, right? You build something minimal.
Okay,
You measure how users respond, and then you learn from that and adjust.
got it.
And a good example of this is Intuit,
Mm-hmm.
the company behind TurboTax.
Okay, yeah.
They used this cycle to develop their mobile tax filing app SnapTax.
Okay.
Initially, it was just designed for scanning forms,
Okay.
but through experimentation, they discovered that people actually wanted to complete their entire tax return on their phone.
Oh, wow.
So they adapted based on what they learned.
Interesting. So they pivoted.
They pivoted.
And that brings us to the MVP,
Yeah, the minimum viable product.
minimum viable product, which a lot of people get wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
And I love how Rees in the book, he talks about how Groupon started with like a simple WordPress blog
Yeah.
and handmade PDF coupons.
That's a great story. Yeah.
Like it wasn't fancy, but it allowed them to test the core idea
Right.
without overinvesting, right?
Exactly. And I think the MVP is not about releasing a half-baked product.
Right.
It's about identifying what are your riskiest assumptions.
Okay.
And how can we test those as quickly and cheaply as possible.
So how would our listener figure out what their MVP should be?
The key question to ask is, what's the smallest thing I can build to learn whether my core assumption is valid?
Okay.
It's about focusing on those essential elements just to gather feedback and iterate.
Okay. And sometimes based on that feedback, you might need to pivot.
Absolutely. Pivoting is not about admitting defeat.
Okay.
It's about having the courage to course correct based on what you've learned.
Okay.
He uses the example of Wealthfront,
Okay.
which began as a fantasy stock market game.
Right.
But through experimentation, they realized their technology could actually be applied to automated investing.
Interesting.
And they pivoted to become a leader in that space.
So pivoting is kind of like saying, okay, this isn't working quite as planned,
Right.
but what we've learned points us in a different direction.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us to this importance of working in small batches.
Small batches, like cookies.
Well, maybe not exactly like that. But think of it more like Toyota's famous and accordion cord.
And cord on cord.
Okay. So any worker on the assembly line can pull this cord to stop production if they spot a problem.
Wow, that sounds radical.
It does sound radical,
Well,
but
wouldn't that slow things down?
Well, actually, it's the opposite.
Really?
Stopping the line to fix a problem immediately leads to higher quality and faster production in the long run.
How interesting.
So for project managers, this translates to breaking down work into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay, so instead of aiming for a big reveal at the end,
Right.
you're constantly checking in, getting feedback, making adjustments along the way.
Exactly. And a company called Alphabet Energy,
Okay.
they develop waste heat to energy technology.
Oh.
They use this approach.
Okay.
They work in these small cycles to refine their product based on customer feedback,
Got it.
which allows them to adapt really quickly and stay ahead of the curve.
So working in small batches keeps you flexible and responsive to feedback.
Exactly.
What's next on our list?
So understanding your engine of growth.
Okay.
So Ries outlines these three main engines.
Okay.
Sticky, viral, and paid.
Okay, so sticky is like you can't get rid of it.
Yeah, sticky is about keeping users engaged and coming back for more.
Okay, got it.
Viral is about spreading the word through word-of-mouth social sharing.
Okay.
And paid is about using marketing dollars to reach your audience.
So like a subscription service that you just can't quit would be sticky.
Exactly.
And something like TikTok would be viral. Everyone's talking about it,
Exactly.
sharing it.
Yeah. And for project managers, the key is to identify which engine is most relevant to their project's goals.
Right.
So if you're building an internal tool,
Mm-hmm.
you'll likely focus on making it so indispensable that people can't imagine working without it.
Right.
But if you're developing a social media app, virality is key.
So understanding your engine of growth helps you focus your efforts.
Right.
Prioritize the features that matter most.
Exactly.
But how do you know if you're on the right track?
That brings us to tip number 8.
Okay.
Use actionable metrics.
Okay.
It's not just about tracking any old metric. It's about focusing on the ones that truly reflect your project's success.
So are there bad metrics?
Yeah, there are bad metrics. He talks about Grocket,
Okay.
an online test prep platform.
Okay.
And they were initially obsessed with, user numbers and questions answered.
Okay.
But those were what he calls vanity metrics.
Vanity metrics. So they sound good, but they don't actually...
They look good on paper,
Yeah.
but they don't tell the whole story.
Don't tell the whole story.
And Grocket eventually realized that their core assumption, that users chose their platform based on product experience, was wrong.
Okay.
Their actionable metrics, things like conversion rates and customer acquisition cost, revealed that marketing and positioning were far more influential than they thought.
Oh, so they were measuring the wrong things.
They are measuring the wrong thing.
Okay, that's a great point.
Yeah.
You can have all the data in the world, but if you're not looking at the right numbers,
You're flying blind.
you're flying blind.
Yeah.
Okay, so actionable metrics, got it.
Yes.
What's next?
So tip number 9 is about getting to the root of problems.
Okay.
And for that, Ries recommends this technique called the 5 whys.
The 5 whys. Okay, I like it already.
It's deceptively simple.
Okay.
So when a problem arises, you ask why 5 times to uncover the underlying cause.
Okay.
He shares an example from IMVU where a technical glitch turned out to be a management issue.
Oh, really? Okay. Can you elaborate on that one?
Yeah, so a piece of software wasn't working properly, and by asking why repeatedly, they discovered that the root cause wasn't a technical flaw, but it was a manager who didn't believe in training his team.
Oh.
And this lack of training led to the technical error.
Wow, so instead of just fixing the immediate problem,
Right.
they addressed the underlying cause.
Exactly.
So they prevented that from happening again.
Exactly. The 5 whys helps you avoid those Band-Aid solutions and make strategic investments in the right fixes.
So we've talked about building, measuring, learning, pivoting, working in small batches,
Yep.
understanding your engine of growth, using actionable metrics, and getting to the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
What's our final tip?
So tip number 10 is crucial. Build an adaptive organization.
Okay.
It's about fostering a culture that embraces experimentation and continuous learning.
Mm-hmm.
He highlights Intuit again.
Okay.
As a company that successfully made this shift, they moved away from these rigid waterfall development processes to a more flexible, customer-centric approach.
This is not just about changing processes, but also changing mindsets. How can project managers, create that kind of environment?
I think it starts with leadership.
Okay.
Project managers need to create a safe space for their teams to experiment, learn from their mistakes, and constantly iterate.
Right.
It's about moving away from a blame culture and embracing a growth mindset.
So celebrate learning, even if it comes from, what you might call a failure.
Absolutely, because those so-called failures are often packed with valuable insights.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, the beginning of our deep dive, we talked about how the lean startup, emphasizes validated learning.
Right.
But Ries also warns against doing the wrong things efficiently.
Yeah.
What does he mean by that?
You can have a perfectly executed project plan, hit all your deadlines, and still end up with a product or service that nobody wants. Right? So it's not just about doing things right. It's about doing the right things.
So efficiency without a clear understanding of customer value
is a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we dive headfirst into that next project, we need to ask ourselves, what's the riskiest assumption I'm making?
That's a good question.
And how can I test it quickly and cheaply?
And I think that's the beauty of this lean startup approach.
Okay.
It forces you to confront your assumptions, gather evidence, and adapt based on what you learn.
Yeah.
It's about turning uncertainty into a strategic advantage.
So whether you're launching a new product or revamping a process or leading a team, these lean startup principles can really help you.
Absolutely.
And remember, even established companies need to constantly adapt and learn to stay ahead.
The world is changing faster than ever.
That is the truth.
And those who embrace this iterative, customer-centric approach will be the ones who thrive.